and we'll do a laptop switching. But over to Mike for your...
Thank you very much. Thank you. I don't know if I'm better off with or without the mic. Can you hear me well enough without the mic? Better. I thought it might be. So I'll put this down. It's not great, is it? Great to be in London. As you can probably tell from my accent, I am actually London born and bred. But I'm not down here that often. I moved up to Chesterfield in Derbyshire in 2009. The credit crunch caused me to, helped me decide to leave London. But it's good to put some faces to names that I recognise that I haven't met before. Actually, quite a lot of new faces new to me tonight. So exercises in Lean-Agile transformation. What we've actually got today is part one of a 5-session workshop. I alternate between this and a talk when I do meetups. I'm doing 3 meetups in 3 weeks over the course of June. It's just an accident that's worked out that way. So a bit about myself. Kanban from the inside. Quick, this might be embarrassing, but I will ask for a show of hands. Who has read Kanban from the inside? At least a couple of you, 3 or 4 of you. What's interesting about that book, although it is a very practical book, it's a book that's really rooted in values. The first 9 chapters are all the names of values: transparency, balance, collaboration, customer focus, flow, and so on. And I've really continued that on into AgendaShift. If you ask yourself the question, how do we know that those values are being played out in a way that's helpful to the people working in the organisation, to the organisation's customers and so on, you start to get a much richer understanding of what these values are about. I'll just hold this microphone down here, it's just giving you a bit more volume. Just gives you a bit more of an idea of what these values are about, how they can help you. And I've taken that idea further and further until we're now just talking about what outcomes do we want. And the session we're going to do this evening, it's a discovery session, and it's a way of exploring with your team, with your organisation, with your clients, if you're a consultant or a coach, what is it they're trying to achieve? What do they need to achieve? What obstacles must they overcome to achieve what they need to achieve, and so on. Really simple idea, but in a way quite radical. Most of what we do in IT, we're given a solution to implement, aren't we? I mean, we like to tell ourselves we're given a problem to solve, but actually 9 times out of 10, we're already told what the answer is, and that's actually quite depressing. So I'm, putting out there ways of exploring outcomes. So if you're given a solution, perhaps you can work backwards to understand what the outcomes are as a way of exploring the needs of your organisation, of your client. Or if you do have the luxury of starting with a blank sheet of paper, rather than just coming up with a list of all the things that we could do, why not start instead with what we'd like to achieve? Again, make it all very centred on outcomes. I'm not going to turn this into a big lecture. It's much more fun to actually just try it, which is what we're going to do. Pretty much straight away. So this is the discovery section. Discovery, exploration, mapping, elaboration, operation. Anything I've got in bold down here is a kind of outcome. So the accomplishments that we'd like to achieve, outcomes that we've identified, goals of the organisation, goals of our team, and so on. Right, so a little exercise. Before we do start the exercise, we need to do a little bit of organisation. Can you arrange yourselves in groups of 4? Now the chairs are very helpfully arranged so that you're all in 4s. If you're not in a 4, perhaps if you're in 1 or a 2, can you join with a 3? Right, next question. Do all of you have one of these cards? They may look suspiciously like advertising, but they are actually a tool for one of these exercises. Put your hand up if you don't have a card. So we need a few at the back. Here we go. Actually, Carl will take them along. You won't need them right away, so don't worry. Just put your hand up if you need a card, and there's some spares to pick up. That's great.
There's a 5 down here.
We want a 4 that would make a 5, or how many 5s have we got? Right, are we ready? Right, they say never start with an apology, but I'm going to break that rule. I'm deaf on one side, very deaf in this side. So I actually struggle to hear when there's noise from multiple places in the room. If I need people to be quiet, or need you to be quiet, I'll put my hand up. And you know the game, you all put your hand up until the last person's looking embarrassed. So I'll do that. Also, very happy for you to ask questions, to shout out, or whatever. If you're going to shout out a question, do please wave your hand. Sometimes I'll be looking to see who's talking, and it turns out to be the person right next to me, which is a little bit embarrassing. So it's just quicker for everybody if you wave your hand. So that's good. Right, I just want to engage your. I know it's in the evening already, but some of you've had a beer. That might help. I want you to engage your imaginations for a moment. So you're climbing into a time machine. You're jumping forward a few months, 6 months, 9 months, maybe a year, maybe a little longer, not too much longer. And you've absolutely nailed it. Not just you, but your team, your organisation. You've achieved so much, and your organisation is taking you all out for a big celebration. I don't know how big your organisations are, whether there is even a building big enough to hold all of you. Imagine if ASOS pays for a celebration for everybody. They must hire a pretty big venue. When I was at UBS, we used to hire nightclubs sometimes and that was just for a department, not for the whole company. You need to hire Wembley Stadium to fit everybody in. But you're celebrating the results of several months of hard work, spectacular success. Everyone is so pleased that you've exceeded, not just met expectations, but exceeded expectations. So 3 things to think about, and you can summarise these as what, who, and why. So what are the meaningful accomplishments, objectives, and goals that you've together achieved over those months? So it's a long enough period for these accomplishments to be pretty significant. You've all worked very hard for a significant amount of time. You're celebrating with all the people that helped you achieve those accomplishments. So who are those people? So you're probably going to start with your team, but who else supported you? Your managers, your suppliers, your customers might have helped you. Perhaps you think it's right to invite people from home that supported you, and where does your resilience, where does your energy come from? So that's the who. And then the why question is about what made this meaningful, what made it worth all that effort. Okay, so what, who, and why. So what I'd like you to do, I'd like you to spend each on your own a minute thinking about that. Then I'm going to give you 2 minutes to discuss it with the person you're sitting next to. So if you're in a 4, that's 2 discussions of 2 people, 2 pairs. This is why I wanted 4 people. If you're in a 5, you need a little discussion between 3 people and a little discussion with 2 people. And then I'll give you some time at the end for you to discuss it as a group. And we'll do a little bit of sharing afterwards. Who's seen that pattern before? 1 person, 2 people, 4 people, the whole room. Yeah, it has a name. I've done this for years, but I didn't realise it had a name. It's 1, 2, 4, all. You can Google for it. I can give references to it. It's a really handy little pattern. It's a great way of making sure that everyone gets to think and everybody gets to participate in some way, even if not people that are willing to speak to the whole room. And you don't just focus on the first sentence that the most important person in the room said, which is what sometimes happens. So a bit of 1, 2, 4 all on this. This is a Remember the Future exercise. You're remembering the celebration. Okay, I'm going to start my timer and give you a minute on your own. You can start now. I haven't started my timer yet, but you can start now. Right, you've had your minute. If I was doing this with a client and I could see that people were busy writing notes or looked deep in thought, I might give them a bit longer. But we don't all share a context. I think it's just much more fun for us now to have a little conversation, comparing notes, learning a little bit about each other, learning a little bit about the challenges that each of us are facing and so on, and what we're trying to achieve. So the what, who and why again. now in pairs or threes. So you're splitting your groups in half, and I'll give you 2 minutes for that. I love it when that happens. So I'll give you 4 minutes now. Discuss this in your groups of 4 or 5. But this time, I just want to keep a special ear out for things that are common and things that are, unique. And I suppose on top of that, anything that particularly stands out as interesting that you might encourage someone to share or might want to share yourself. Okay? So 4 minutes, what, who and why. Start when you like. I'm starting the timer now. Brilliant. Right, how do you get on? Who'd like to share first? Remember to wave your hand so I know who I'm looking at, I'm listening to. Or I'll pick on a group. Oh, this group here, yeah?
Yeah, so the commonalities that we had, everyone was motivated for the actual reason of getting a goal achieved.
Everyone motivated by the goal, if you can't hear that. Yes, that's the common thing for their group.
That's one of the main things.
There was very much focus on the product.
Focus on the product
Yeah, and deliverables.
and deliverables.
And
Getting quick feedback, to actually adjust and get something that was more in line with what the customer actually wanted.
That's great. So if you didn't hear that, getting feedback, adjusting, getting something closer to what the customer needed and so on.
and great benefits as well.
Benefits?
Benefits all round benefits.
Benefits all round, as in bonuses or
Business value.
business value?
Yeah.
Right.
And a couple of nice international trips as well.
Good. We'll stop there. I'll ask another group. So things that were in common in your group. This group.
So I think one thing that was influencing others to change their minds about the thing that we're trying to do.
Okay, influencing others, get alignments, pulling together, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Okay. One more group. Yeah.
In this group, we have people like to empower their team and have they feel happy about their achievements.
Okay, the team feeling empowered and happy about their achievements. That's great. I get very different results from this exercise. When I do this at clients, it's very focused on projects, deliverables, that kind of thing. One client I was at in Holland last month, they actually used this exercise to invent a whole new project they'd like to do. So they were imagining a future in which this new project had been done. They only just had the idea during the course of their discussions, which was funny. It was completely in keeping with the goals of the day. I was quite happy with that. Sometimes when I do like a day focused on practitioners, so people like you, coaches, consultants, and so on. Sometimes the answers are all very coachy type outcomes. And I worry slightly sometimes that those outcomes are not sufficiently rooted in the objectives of the company as a whole in terms of what needs to be done. They might be right, the things they're talking about might be right at the top of the list of the organisation's concerns. But sometimes when I see a whole room of people saying, "Oh, it's all about implementing Agile," I just get slightly worried that there's no delivery going on. Could be right, could be wrong. Anyway, they were all great answers. So here, what surprised you that you heard from other people, or perhaps you could give a nudge to someone who said something surprising so they can share it.
I think the environment where you are working.
Yeah.
One of the team members was saying that the family and the friends, if they support you,
Yes.
of course you are a happy, chubby person and you go to work with in a good mood.
Yes.
You are more ready to deliver.
So some organisations are like that. It feels like friends and family. You come to work and feel supported, energised. Other organisations not like that, presumably. Most of them. Right. Okay, one more. Any other surprises? Yeah.
I think it wasn't a surprise, but it was a commonality around the amount of hard work. Everybody seemed to say, just how much hard work they were doing, how many crazy hours they were working.
Yes.
That seemed to be a really, I'm not sure it's surprising, but it reinforces what I think. They
Right.
we are working really hard.
Yes. Okay. Whether that's, I suppose the question is whether that's unsustainably hard or not. Whether I talked about this being meaningful. People will work harder when they think they're doing something meaningful. I think that's actually something positive. That's a really good point to segue into this next exercise. You've got these incredible accomplishments to achieve. And I'm going to give you two choices. You can work 20-hour days. You can live on pizza, black coffee. You can sleep under your desks, 7-day weeks. Or, and maybe this is actually the more radical option of the two. So everyone able to work consistently at their best. Individuals, teams, between teams across the organisation. Right conversations, right people, the best possible moment. Needs anticipated, met at just the right time. I want you to think about that for a minute. So we'll do the same structure again, 1, 2, 4 all. I'll give you a minute to just let that sink in on your own. I shall make that 2 minutes, because as well as a minute sinking in and putting yourself into that place, think about what obstacles are in the way of that being fully realised in your organisation. Okay? And then we'll do it. So 2 minutes on your own. First of all, letting that sink in and imagining what that would be like. Then thinking about what obstacles are in the way of that being realised. Then I'll give you 3 minutes in your pairs and 5 minutes in your groups. Now by the time you're in your groups, it will probably be useful if each group can write down that list of obstacles. So if any group doesn't have paper and pen to work with, can they put their hand, and Charlie will give you some. Well volunteered, Charlie. So just while Charlie is giving those out, I wrote a blog post in the last 2-3 weeks, and it was called something like a true north for Lean-Agile ? And I'm actually proposing this as a possible true north. You know, this is, if I'm honest, unachievable. You're not always going to have the right conversations at the best possible moment, every time, every day. You're not always going to have your needs anticipated and met at the right time. But wouldn't it be great if we could work towards that? It's one of these things that's sort of just out of reach, but we can understand it. It's something that gives us a direction to be aiming for. So this is my proposed Lean-Agile True North. We all got each group got something to write on now. Don't feel you need to write from the beginning, but by the time you're in your groups of 4 or 5, if you could write down those obstacles, that will be then the input to the following exercise. Right, so 2 minutes on your own, starting now. Okay, stop it there. We'll keep this moving now. It's pizza coming at 8 o'clock. Right, so now in your groups, and you want to come out with, in 4 minutes, a consolidated list of obstacles. Right, just quickly around the room, sort of roughly clockwise. Let's hear an obstacle from each group. An obstacle?
We've had personal problems.
Personal problems. This one?
Management layers.
Sorry, say again?
Management layers.
Management layers. Different agendas.
A lack of common understanding.
I said the next group along. Lack of trust.
Resistance to change.
Resistance to change. Right at the back. Greg, are you in the group or not? Lack of clear priorities. Group in front of Greg.
Problem complexity.
Say again?
Problem complexity.
Something complexity. I told you I was deaf.
We had silos.
Silos. Availability of? Unavailability, yeah.
Inability to generate fast feedback.
Inability to generate fast feedback.
Lack of knowledge.
Lack of knowledge.
All of those.
All of those. Yeah. It's actually a great set of obstacles, and I know each group has got more.
Fixed mindsets was the other
Yes,
one.
fixed mindsets, great. I'm not going to make you do it now. If this was a paid workshop, I would have got you to think again about the ones that started with not, or lack of, or un, and try to turn that into something else. So actually get, rather than say that your problem is the lack of something, what is the thing that you're actually seeing that you want to do something about? Saying lack of something, sometimes you're already thinking too early about solution, not thinking about problems. Not always true, but often true. I've made Tony think, you can see it on his face. Right, so we're going to play a game. It's called 15-minute photo. And I've lost my clicker, I knew this was going to happen. Do it the old-fashioned way. 15-minute photo. Photo stands for from obstacles to outcomes. Outcomes are bound to come up sooner or later. The 15 minutes is one of the constraints that makes this a game. So I'm only going to give you 15 minutes for this game. There is one other constraint. You're going to be working in three roles: the client, the coach, and the scribe. The client and the scribe roles are quite easy to explain. So the client, he's the person or she's the person with the obstacle. You know, they own the obstacle, they're able to talk about it, talk about its impact or whatever. The scribe, the job of the scribe is to write down anything that sounds remotely like an outcome. And I use the words remotely like an outcome because I want you to keep writing. Don't wait for the perfect outcome, the perfectly formed outcome. If it sounds vaguely like something that someone might sometime want, then write it down. The coach. Now, those of you that aren't the client or the scribe are in the roles of the coach. And this is where the card comes in. So quickly decide amongst yourselves, very quickly, who to start with. You're going to rotate roles. Every 3 minutes, I'll ask you to rotate roles so that everyone gets to go in the role of client. The coach is only allowed to use the questions on the card with one small enhancement. Wherever there's an X, they're allowed to use words previously spoken by the client. So you have to listen as well as speak and as well as choose the right questions. So let's give you an idea of how this works. Let's hear, what was your first outcome, Charlie? Personal problems. What kind of personal problems? So that was one from the middle of the card. What kind of X? Oh, actually, that's not a great example, actually. I'll choose another one. What was the one you had here?
Management layers.
Management layers. Okay. So what would you like to have happen? Have fewer management layers. And then what happens?
Communication flows better.
Fantastic. And then what happens?
People are more informed about what's happening.
Good. Is there anything else about people being more informed?
Decisions are quicker.
Decisions are quicker. What happens before decisions are quicker?
They're blocked.
They're blocked. And I'll leave the question at the bottom. I won't demonstrate. Is there a relationship between X and Y? That comes with a health warning. It's very easy to use this question in a judgmental way. Is there a relationship between your weight and your love of chocolate, for example? So we actually don't use this one in this exercise. We use it in a later exercise. So the two most important questions on this card are the top one: what would you like to have happen? And then what happens? So what would you like to have happen tends to flip things that are negative into something positive. It doesn't always work. Sometimes you have to ask it more than once. With any of these questions, you can ask them repeatedly. That is especially true of then what happens. If you've got something positive, ask it again, and you'll probably get another positive outcome, as we had in the example just now. And you can ask it several times. There's a joke about the 5 whys, by the way. Why are they called the 5 whys? because when you ask them the 6th time, you get a punch in the face. The same could be true of then what happens. It's amazing how many times you can get away with asking it, and in fact, sometimes the client gets the hang of it, and then just rattles off a whole list of outcomes. I've seen a dozen outcomes from one obstacle, so it does work. What kind of something is when you need someone to be more specific. So what kind of personal problems? I wanted to hear some more specific personal problems, some more juicy personal problems maybe. Is there anything else about X? That's where you want to rewind the conversation to some earlier part, so you can just focus back on something that was interesting but you weren't able to deal with at the time. What happens before? In the context of this game, you can imagine this being used in a 5 whys thing. What happened before the machine broke down? What happened before that? Here, the time to use it is when someone has made a leap of logic that you don't understand. So if you heard the outcome, we all get $1 million bonuses and we're breaking out the champagne, and you can't understand why suddenly we've got $1 million bonuses and breaking out the champagne, the question is, what happens before $1 million bonuses and we break out the champagne? Got the hang of it? So I'm going to ask you to be disciplined, and I'm going to ask you to monitor each other. If you're not the client or the scribe, stick to the questions on the card, and notice when other people are straying from it, and discourage them from doing it. So I'll stick the timer on for 15 minutes. We will have to limit to 15 minutes if we're going to get our pizza in time. But every 3 minutes, I will ask you to rotate the client, clockwise, and when you need to, rotate the scribe as well. Everybody clear or clear enough? Clear enough. Right, so 15 minutes starts now. In case it's not clear enough, let's see how quickly or how many outcomes you can generate. So I'll ask you to count them up at the end. So if you're the scribe, be generous. Write down anything that sounds remotely like an outcome. We'll see how many we can get. Okay? Right, stop it there. Pens down. Stop writing. Right, as someone said, we've earned our pizza tonight. That was hard work, wasn't it? Yeah. And it was hard work, whether you were the client or the coach. I think slightly easier for the scribes, but even the scribes have work to do. So just with the scribes, how many outcomes have you got? Just give you. We haven't got much time, but roughly, 12 outcomes. 11. Any advance on 12? Altogether? Up into the 20s? 25? Yeah. So we'll stop at 25. That's actually pretty good. You've done well at this exercise. So it's great to have an exercise like this that generates lots of sticky notes, you can imagine. Some of your outcomes will feel like these are long-term things. These are things to aim for. These are going to take us a while before you get there. And you keep asking, then what happens, then what happens, then what happens. The outcomes get further away in time. They tend to get more abstract as well, a bit more thematic. So we can have those as some of our long-term goals. Some will feel like things that we can achieve right away. These are at least the things that are going to go right to the top of the list of things to tackle. So here I called those opportunities or immediate opportunities. Then you'll have some in between. And those are sometimes the most interesting ones because they're the ones that give you a sense that you're making real progress. When you're starting to check off those ones that weren't just the quick wins, you know that you're doing well. And so that was the scribes. What was it like being the client? Just quickly. How many times did you find yourself pausing, thinking, I've got to dig deep to answer this one? Quite a few nods to that one. It's quite remarkable. These are such simple questions, and you even know what the questions are going to be. But even so, they cause you to dig deep. It doesn't always happen, but it often happens. Did anyone achieve, as a client, an insight they hadn't achieved before? Did you suddenly realise something you hadn't realised before? Okay, that's fine. I had one woman at one workshop I did that was so excited by this, she said, I'm going to go home and do it on myself. She thought it was brilliant. Right, the coaches. Now, it was quite hard for the coaches. Tell me what was hard about it.
Use the sentences.
Sorry?
To use the sentences on the card.
Yes, to use only the sentences on the card, to listen, I heard. What does it stop you from doing? Stops you from judging, stops you from giving advice. It's funny, even though these are such a limited menu of questions, they're actually quite powerful questions. They're not binary questions. They're not questions that invite a yes/no answer. They're not the kind of questions where you can guess easily what the answer is going to be. They're genuine questions. They're genuine in the sense that you're asking a question, not knowing what the answer is going to be. And that's, some of us, we're coaches, we're analysts, we're supposed to be good at listening, but quite often we jump into advice giving long before we have actually listened properly to what the problems are. Sorry?
Got a question, observation. It may not have been the purpose of this, but it felt to me that we actually skipped over the difficult bit, which was, a lot of our ones, the obstacles are around mindset.
Yes.
And we all agreed that if we could change people's mindset, then there would be lots of really good outcomes. But the bit the questions didn't address really was the how are we going to do this?
I actually don't think that you can separate mindset from what you actually do, and if you're going to have a strategy for transformation that's going to work, it's got to accept the reality of the current situation, and you've got to start to think of if we got wrong mindset, what is the output of that? What do we see and hear in the organisation that we would like to see less of? Can we frame that as an obstacle? Can we think of ways to overcome it, and so on? You can't flick a switch and see mindset changed overnight. People have got to experience it. People have got to see it working. They've got to see it work in other teams, and so on.
But is this process designed to generate those ideas? It seems to me that it's more about identifying what will happen if we do change it.
Yes.
It doesn't seem to focus so much on generating ideas.
The idea is that it generates agreement on what it is we're trying to achieve. And if you don't do that, and it's a really fundamental thing, if you don't do that, you tend to start with solutions or telling people that you've got the wrong mindset, and that just generates resistance. If you've got the room full of people agreeing what it is we want to achieve, you can then work backwards to the actions that you want to take in order to achieve those outcomes. This works from the premise, it's not always true, but it works on the premise that if you are fighting resistance to change, you probably got off on the wrong foot to start with. And too many approaches to change are dominated by thinking about how to address resistance. But that just tells me that you're trying to impose something on somebody before you've got agreement on what it is you're trying to achieve. So that's why I keep banging on about outcomes. They are so fundamental. And we'll leave that exercise there. We are running out of time. I think the pizza's arrived. I think we've got a couple of minutes just to wrap up. I'll step out of the way of the screen. So why are we doing all this? I talked a little bit about change management and so on. I actually think we are still suffering from a serious hangover from the 20th century in terms of how we think about change. We've got the top-down imposed change, and that has the problem of resistance, and that's a real problem of respect there, I genuinely believe. It has a sustainability problem as well. Too much of that change is, you bring the consultants in, they come up with a transition plan, and then they go away, and then you wonder how progress is going to be sustained afterwards. A kind of a reaction to that, and a very understandable reaction to that, is the idea that we can achieve it all with continuous improvement. We can work just at team level very often, finding improvements here and there that will make things better. What tends to happen, one of two things happens, typically, or too often at least. is that teams just work on things that make their lives more comfortable. It's sub-optimization if you're into that kind of stuff. Or it just runs out of steam entirely. How many have come across the pattern where teams religiously have their retrospectives every sprint for the first few sprints, then they become monthly, then they become quarterly, and they don't have them at all. Or if there are other anti-patterns as well. They have a lovely retrospective, but nothing changes. There's no accountability, for example. No carrying over of actions, no reviewing where we got to with stuff, and so on. All sorts of anti-patterns around continuous improvement. I do believe in continuous improvement. Sounds like I'm knocking it, but it suffers from different problems to transformation initiatives, but much the same end result. Very little sustained, ambitious change. And I think what's missing is serious engagement on outcomes. It's very obviously missing from the transformation initiative, because you start with the solution and then worry about resistance. The problem with too many teams around continuous improvement is they don't seriously engage with people outside the team. And it's too focused on comfort, and because it's not achieving anything meaningful, it then runs out of steam. So what I'd love to get to is continuous transformation. We know that continuous transformation is possible. We've seen examples of it. In Toyota, for example, that's the classic example, but there are others. There is definitely ambition there, and we shouldn't be afraid of ambition. We shouldn't think that just because something is hard or big that it's not actionable. So we need to have some serious engagement with people in our teams, but also outside our teams. We need to be respectful of people, we need to engage with people, talk to people, work through the issues and so on. And it needs to be sustained. It will only be sustained when everyone understands what we're trying to do, everyone understands what our longer term goals are, that we've actually made the changes in the organisation necessary to make sure that there is the appropriate transparency and accountability around this stuff and so on. So this really is what I'm about, what Agenda Shift is all about. You've done stage 1 of a 5-stage workshop, all about generating outcomes, then thinking about what general approaches can we take that would be appropriate to achieve the outcomes that we want. Build a map of what we want to achieve. It's still all around outcomes. It's basically a story map, but where instead of user stories, outcomes. And then there's the how. So hypothesis-based change, feedback loops, all that kind of stuff. You've done the discovery. We've got an idea of where it is we want to get to, perhaps enough to define some scope, to present a very high-level plan, and we'll go on to explore in more detail where are the opportunities, where are the problems, perhaps quantify those, explore those in more detail, generate a finer granularity of outcome and so on. So we've got all the inputs that we could possibly need to do a good job of the mapping. I'll skip that slide and the next one. Just to say, everything in bold here is some kind of outcome. If you haven't guessed it already, very serious about outcomes. I should give some acknowledgements here, in particular to the clean language community. So that's where two things came from. These questions are a small subset of the clean language questions, or the clean questions. So that was invented by a guy called David Grove. He's passed away now. He was a New Zealand therapist. Came to the UK, strongly influenced the therapy community in the UK, and more recently the coaching community. And it's only just getting a toehold in the Agile community. So I think, imagine for many of you here, this is possibly the first time you've come across clean language. I read these 3 books in this order, and I can wholeheartedly recommend this reading order. The 5-Minute Coach, that's just the kind of book you'd expect from the title. I thought before I start selling this stuff to people, I ought to understand where it came from. And I read the second book, Revealing Metaphors and Opening Minds. Judy Rees has now become a friend of mine, one of the co-authors. And the last one, From Contempt to Curiosity, by Caitlin Walker. That was a book that really inspired me. And also, it was the source of the Working at Your Best idea that I've incorporated into that True North. and that true north, if you didn't pick it up, so there's an element from Caitlin, the working at your best. There was an element from Agile, the thing about right conversations at the right time, give an idea of what collaboration is all about. Some lean ideas, things happening at the right time, just in time. And I included some stuff about needs as well. I've drunk the GDS Kool-Aid, having worked on a couple of GDS projects. And I think many of us need to take customer collaboration to a whole new level if we're going to really achieve what we need to achieve. You can download these cards, or you can ask me for the download link. I think is how it works. If you go to agendashift.com/resources, that's where you get hold of the PDF for the cards. I just printed these on these are printed on very big sheets of satin card and then cut down to A6. That's how my printers do it. So I get these done a couple of hundred at a time, but you can print a few for your team. Also, the FeatureBan game and other things like that are in the same place. So there's resources again. There's a Slack group, which several of you in the room are already members of, and a LinkedIn group. And again, via the resources page or via agendashift.com, you can invite yourself to the LinkedIn group, and you can ask me to pull you into the Slack group. And I'd love to see you there. And I, of course, must mention the book as well. I didn't really talk much about the new book at the beginning, but it really is the book of the workshop. This is just part 1 at the moment, just 5 chapters corresponding to the 5 stages of the workshop. So in chapter 1, you'll see an in-depth walk through the kinds of exercises that we've been through. It's not written as a facilitation guide. It's written as a conversation with you, talking you through the steps that we've been through as a group, with some background as well, to understand why we're doing what we're doing. I think that is it. I will leave it there. Do I have time for questions, or is it straight to pizza? Must be questions over pizza. That's the result, isn't it? And save me a beer, because I haven't had a chance to have one yet. Thank you very much.